Welcome to CISO's Insiders podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Today I'm speaking with Michael Radzicki, and Michael is a veteran in the cybersecurity space and has been for at least a couple of decades now. You know, I see that one of your earlier roles in this space were in Chase Manhattan Bank, where you were actually the VP of Internet Technology Group, and then you spent like many years in a company called Equiland. Maybe you can talk about that in a minute. And you spent a long time there, and from there you moved to a director role in information security at Datalot. And I understand that right now you're the chief information security and risk officer for IDB Bank. And with that. Please,
Deputy Chief Information Security and Risk Officer. Yeah, I don't have my boss's job yet.
Yeah, you don't want to steal his thunder. Yeah, no, I
exactly
get that.
Exactly.
My bad. And with that, step in and properly introduce yourself.
Hey Ben. So as you mentioned, Mike Radzicki. I've been all around the IT and information security world over the last 30 years. Mostly in the financial services sector. I have done a small stint for a marketing company in between my current job and my last one, and just really passionate about the industry. I've got some out-of-the-box thinking that often makes people question the way they normally do things or the way they normally approach things. And I think that's something that I bring to the table that a lot of people in the industry currently don't. It doesn't make me better than them. It just, I've always had this idea of when everybody's thinking alike, only one person's thinking, right? So I try to approach things from a different aspect than a general security person would, and that probably goes back to my days first starting out as an IT person, right? As any IT person can tell you, if you work a help desk job at some point, you've seen everything, right? And as long as you bring that problem-solving approach along with you, it helps, right? It helps set you apart from other people in the industry, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for that, context and description, and we'll definitely touch on that more. The purpose of the podcast is to understand how you came to be, a leader in the industry, and holding a deputy CISO role right now. And before that, I think you had similar roles as well. And that maturity and that growth for being that IT guy or IT manager into the transition into cybersecurity is definitely something that we're exploring in these talks. And I think I mentioned in our initial call that the purpose of this podcast is to learn more about you and for you to share your experience. It's not specifically to get details or information about your current role or about your current company that you're employed with. It's more along the lines of learning more about you, your path, your journey, and the industry as a whole, and to get and to hopefully to have some fun as well, if possible. Yeah. And I always like to start with a couple of questions before we get started. If you're willing to share your marital status and your favorite drink.
Sure. So I've been married. My wife and I just celebrated 25 years together over the summer. So I hope she would agree with me when I say there've been 25 very good years. But I can't speak for her. But I guess the fact that she's still hanging around means it can't be all bad, right? So and my favorite drink, I'm a big fan of single malt Scotch. If I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be an 18-year-old McCowan.
Yeah, that's a good one. Good. Thank you for that. And with that, let's dive in and try to unpack this and learn more about you. Uh, Looking back at your career, is there one thing you wish you'd known when you began it?
Yeah. So, look, I started in technology, right, or engineering field back in the 80s, before the days of the internet, and everybody having AOL or one of their competitors, which I can't even name it, like Prodigy, CompuServe, things like that. So I started out doing software QA, which was interesting. And again, the days before cell phones existed or pagers even, right? And as the industry morphed, right, and uh, they started handing out pagers to people for on-call work, right? When I got my first pager and got the first call at 3 o'clock in the morning that there was a problem, and this is before the ability to remotely log in, and I had to get in a car and go to the office. Um, my first thought was, if I'd have known I was going to do this, or I was going to end up doing stuff like this, I would have studied a little harder and gone to medical school and become a surgeon. Because if I'm going to get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, it should be to save people's life and not because uh, somebody on an overnight help desk can't do something, right? And needs the IT guy to fix it. So that was probably something I wish I'd have known when I was going into the engineering field, is that this is not the same 9 to 5 job that my father or his father worked, right? It's completely different now.
hmm Yeah, yeah. This is one of the reasons I always preferred consulting. I did work in IT for a while, but yeah, that was a turn off for me as well. Um, and again, reflecting back, what would you say your biggest failure was, and what did you learn from it?
Well, this happened when I was at Equiland, right? We used to do disaster recovery tests a couple of times a year, and this was before I really went down the cybersecurity rabbit hole and all the tangential parts of cybersecurity slash information security. We used to do disaster recovery tests a couple of times a year, because it was required of the company based on the field they were in, right? And we would do them, and they would be successful, and we all patted each other on the back. And then Hurricane Sandy hit the New York area, and our office was downtown New York City, and downtown New York City was flooded, and you weren't allowed to go to downtown New York City for about 6 weeks. And that's when we realized that, great, the stuff in our data center works and the application is still up and running, but nobody can access the office, right? Nobody can get to the office. Nobody can answer phones. Nobody can reply to emails because only some of the staff was had the ability to work from home. Our BlackBerry server at the time was in the office, so it had no power, so we couldn't even do that, right? So that's when I learned the term business continuity, and that was probably the biggest failure, is assuming that because your disaster recovery plan works, right, that you're bulletproof, and nothing can prevent your business from nothing can prevent you from continuing business in the event of a disaster, right? It was an eye-opening experience, and that's actually the event that led me down the cybersecurity rabbit hole, right? I was like, well, what else are we not doing, right? that we think we're doing well, or that we think we're safe. So that was 2012, right? So and then now here we are 10 years later.
Yeah, I think there was a saying, about no battle plan survives the first contact with the enemy, or something like that. So yeah, you just need to keep trying harder, and hope that you won't fail next time, I guess. But reflecting on that, what would you say your biggest accomplishment was?
So the biggest accomplishment is keeping a financial services company free from cyber attacks for over a decade, right? And at the same time, being able to meet, we had a very strict SLA for our applications, right? It was 99.9%. That was the uptime that we promised clients. So to be able to do that for every year for over a decade, and once I really started paying attention to cybersecurity, keeping the firm free of cyber attacks, keep the bad guys out, so to speak, for 10 years, I think that's a pretty impressive accomplishment, right? Given the fact that financial service companies are pretty big targets, right? The fact that we didn't have a single cybersecurity incident once I turned my attention to it is a fairly impressive track record.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the industry, as you probably know, needs a lot of hands-on, a lot of needs a lot of talent right now, right? We have a shortage of talent globally and here in the US as well. And for the anyone that wants to get into the industry right now, what would your advice to them be? Like, what should they do first? How should they get into the industry? Where should they focus their efforts on?
So that's a broad question, right? So I'm gonna give you a broad answer, right? So I'm gonna say concentrate on learning everything you can about IT in general, right? I know a lot of people come into cybersecurity from the network administration field, all right, and there's nothing wrong with that. I came into it from uh, I started out, software QA, which really doesn't have anything to do with cybersecurity. But from there, I went to systems administration. I was a Unix systems administrator for quite a while, right? And anybody who's ever been a Unix administrator knows there's a lot of work that goes into that job with regards to security, right? It's not security specific at the time. It doesn't look like it, but you learn an awful lot about moving parts of the system, right? And what should be available and what should not be available, right? It's not as simple as setting up Windows domains and ACLs and things like that. It's a little more difficult on the Sun side. Um, Also, how all these computers talk to each other. So I think a broad-based knowledge of IT, which would include systems administration, um, is a great way to get into the field, right? Because that also exposes you to application administration and how applications talk to each other and open ports and things like that, right? So I would, if I was going to get into the field, or if somebody asked me what's the best way to get into the field, I would tell them to broaden their knowledge of IT in general, right?
Hmm.
And learn how data flows through a system, right? And then study where you think the weak points of the system are, right? Um, that would be my advice. And then I guess the other thing I would say, right, is to be open to, or is to learn to communicate. That's the other thing, right? Especially if you're in information security, because what I've learned over the years, right? I think when everybody first gets into information security and they're really passionate about it, they want to lock down everything, right? And they want to shut down everything, and they think that's the answer to making a company safe. And then what you realize is you're going to get immediate pushback from people on the business side, right? Saying we can't do business like this, right? So you can't be seen as the person that's going to come in and shut down projects and make sure people can't access A, B, and C from work, right? You need to be able to communicate in a way where you're telling people my job is, part of my job is I'm here to make sure that the business can continue, but it continues in a safe way, right? So I would say two skills you should have, right? A pretty broad-based knowledge of IT and good communication skills.
Yeah. And that actually brings me to a follow-up questions because obviously, and I think I've seen that across the board, most CISOs and high-level professionals out there in the cybersecurity and information security and compliance field have come from, they have some kind of a technical background and a good and solid understanding of that, but at some point there's also that transition into the business world and understanding more
Hmm.
like business related roles, because obviously, as you said, I mean, you can't really talk to leadership and talking to them about only IT and servers and whatnot, because at some point you'll need to be able to communicate uh, to the business like the risks in a coherent manner, right? So I just wanted to get your thoughts around that.
Well, yeah, look, in a small company, this is a much easier conversation, right? But presenting to C level, right? What I learned is you hit them with four items, right? Because if you go into too much detail, you're going to see them checking their emails, looking at their watches, excusing themselves, yawning, right? They don't want to go into the minutia of what's going on. What they need to know is what the risk is, what's the likelihood of the risk uh, being exploited, right? What it would cost to fix it, and what's the potential damage to the company if they don't fix it, right? So, it's a very difficult conversation to say it's going to cost $200,000 to address a problem that if it was exploited would only cost us $10,000, right? But if you can go in and say, we need to budget $50,000 for some new tool to address this issue or something like that, and the potential damage to the company is not only financial but from a reputational aspect, right? That's the stuff that they want to hear, right?
Yeah.
It's those four items. You don't have to go down rabbit holes of what the actual exploit is and how it works and things like that. Just approach it from a very high level, and you're better off, right?
Hmm.
And don't go in there sounding like the sky is falling, right? Because if you go in, if every time you present in a negative light, uh, you know they're gonna it's this again, right? It's the end of the world again. This guy's here to tell us that we're under attack and we're going to be out of business tomorrow, right? So yeah, it's the way you present things, and again, that goes back to communication, right?
Yeah.
When you're speaking to the C level, keep it brief. Be prepared to answer questions. Don't take the questions they're asking you personally, right? They're just trying to see if you did your homework, right, and you prepared to go in, right? So, but also don't go in scared,
Yeah.
right? Uh, you know, go in and just tell them here's the situation, right? And let them make decisions and document everything, right? If somebody tells you no, ask for that in writing, right? Because look, you and I have both seen this where there's a cyber attack on a company, and the CISO is the first one out the door, right? Uh, they catch the blame, right? But at the end of the day, the CISO probably didn't make the decision not to fund something that could have prevented the cyber attack, right? That likely came from somebody above their heads,
Yeah.
you know.
So
Yeah, so document everything, because I've run into it a couple of times where I've told people, the potential is there for A, B, and C to happen, and then A, B, or C did happen, right? And they went, why didn't we catch this? And then that's when I pull up the email, right, saying I did catch this. You guys told me not to worry about it, right? So, or make it a lower priority, something like that. So,
yeah.
it's yeah, you have to cover yourself.
Yeah, and this is where the conversation around the difference between data owners and the role of the CISO or the deputy CISO in this case come to be. But yeah, we won't go that because that's a separate discussion. So we'll just we'll try to push forward. Uh, and you mentioned, so we started the conversation about talking about your journey, as you grew from an IT related role into the cybersecurity management leadership role. Now, and you probably know that, and you probably experienced that in the past, but like that tension that always exists between, the information security or the cybersecurity and IT, whenever like the CISO or your security organization reports under IT, what do you think about that? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's a bad thing?
No, it's a classic conflict of interest, right? Because at the end of the day, that stuff all bubbles up to the same position, right? It all bubbles up to the CIO, right? If you have the CISO reporting up to technology, it all bubbles up to the CIO, right? And the CIO is a technology guy, most likely, right? And they're generally gonna side with technology, from my experience, right? I think a CISO role should roll up to compliance or maybe even legal, right? Or operations, and chief operating officer, chief compliance officer. In my last company, it rolled up to the chief privacy officer, right? But yeah, I don't think it belongs under technology, especially if your job is to challenge technology, right? Like I said, that all bubbles up to a CIO, and I think that's a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's the classic approach, I would say. Although there are still two school of thoughts around that, but okay. Um, and so again, someone is a veteran in the industry who's been around the block a couple times. What do you do to stay current? What are the best resources that you use?
Well, look, there's a lot of resources out there. And I'm not paid by these guys, right? I don't. This isn't an endorsement, right? But I like Hacker News. I like Dark Reading, Security Gladiators. I get all these emails from all these CSO online, right? I get feeds from all these guys in my email, and I commute from where I live to New York City. So these are all good reads either on the way to work or on the way home from work, right? Those are, and I learned this as a early in my career. A company I worked for actually had an item on your annual review whether or not you're doing outside reading, right? And my manager told me about that. He's like, you have to make sure you do outside reading. And I said to him, what's the purpose of that? And he said, how are you going to stay up to speed on new technologies, right? We sit here and we work on the same technology all the time, right? How are you going to know what's new or what direction the industry is going? You have to do outside reading. The company expects you to do outside reading, right? They'll pay for subscriptions, whatever, as long as you're making sure you're reading them. Um, so I learned that early on in my career to always have some type of subscription to a reliable source of information that you can read through and stay up to date on things. Plus, I always hate when somebody who reports up to me knows something before I do. So, so I like to stay on top of things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Let's talk a bit about, let's start talking about the CISO role. But before that, uh, just a quick question about the industry. Is there one myth about this profession or industry that you wanted to debunk?
Yeah, that compliance equals security. Um, I've worked for a company in the past that said we're SOC 2 compliant. So we're secure, and we don't have, as long as we could pass that SOC 2 audit, we could prove to anybody that wants to do business with us that we're secure. And I just walked away and shook my head, and it seemed like uh, every project or everything I wanted to do to mature um, the cybersecurity posture of the company, the first question that was asked was, is this required for SOC or is this required for HIPAA? That was another standard, another compliance standard they were looking at me, right? If it wasn't required for SOC and it wasn't required for HIPAA, it got buried at the bottom, right? And I just kept trying to tell these guys, just because we're compliant doesn't mean we're secure. Let's stop conflating the two, right? They're completely separate things. But I think there's too many small and medium-sized companies out there that think because we're compliant, we're secure. And I've even seen this working for companies with regards to vendor management, right? Like, okay, we're going to do business with this vendor, see if they have a SOC, or see if they have a SOC 2 document, or see if they have an ISO 27001 document. I'm like, what does that mean? That means they're compliant. It doesn't mean they're secure, right? Like, we should be sending them standard information gathering, a SIG, right? We should be sending them a SIG and having them fill out the SIG. That, and even that, to a degree, it's certainly more accurate of their security posture than a SOC or an ISO compliant ISO report saying they're compliant is. But compliance does not equal security.
Okay.
That's the big myth for me.
Got it. Thank you. And talking a bit about the role of the CISO and how it's getting transitioned in the past, let's say 5, even 10 years. And let's start with nowadays. Nowadays, what are the main concerns, in your opinion, that CISOs and leaders in the industry have?
So what are the main concerns? So the rapid pace of change, right? And by that I mean how companies are constantly forced to churn out new products, services, et cetera, right? To not only to keep up with competition or get ahead of competition, right? When you're in a situation like that, especially if you're a SaaS company, right? Software as a service, you're constantly putting out new versions of code and new products, new services, and security becomes a tertiary concern. It's not even a secondary concern; it becomes a tertiary concern, right? Primary concern, does the product work? Secondary concern, are we going to meet the deadline? Or those two flop, right? Are we going to meet the deadline? It doesn't work as advertised. Security is always third on a good day in a situation like that, right? So I'm a big believer in the shift in the idea of shift left and getting security involved as early in the process as possible. The issue here is that people involved in project scoping and putting it together, they see the security guy walk into a meeting, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's the guy who's going to tell us why we can't do what we want to do, right? So, but sometimes you shouldn't do what you want to do, right? So, to me, that's a big concern, right? Is you've got all these web-facing applications and you're inviting people into your infrastructure, right? Even whether it's cloud hosted or on-prem, you're inviting people into your infrastructure and you're not even concerned or one of the primary concerns of churning these products out is not security, right? So if I was a CISO in an organization like that, that would be my primary concern. And then there's all the other good stuff too, right? Like, making sure your employees aren't damaging the company by clicking on emails that they shouldn't be clicking on or visiting websites, right? That's always going to be there. But to me, it's the rapid pace of change, the work from home, the remote world that we're in now. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And again, just expanding a bit more about the roles of the CISO nowadays, what are the most, and I know you mentioned like, needing to have communication skills and some broad perspective on IT, but in today's world, what are the most important skills that the CISO should have, in your opinion?
That's a good question. If we take out an IT background and we take out the ability to communicate properly, I would say they should have a knowledge of the business, right? I just recently completed an MBA, right? Because 20 plus years, 30 years of living on the technical side, I would know the business of the company that I'm working in. After a certain time, you're plugged into all that stuff, right? But how business operates in general, it was not something I understood, right? Did I necessarily need an MBA to understand how business works. No, but it's something I wanted to do, so I did it, right? So I think from a CISO perspective, you have to have an understanding of the business, right? And this way, when you're looking at projects or you're looking at, the company's looking at onboarding a new partner, a new vendor, you understand why, right? It makes your job easier, if you understand the reason why they're doing it, as opposed to just that they're doing it. So I think that's at that level, that's an important skill because you're going to be talking to people on the business side, right? And you need to be able to understand their language. So, to me, that's an important skill. And the other one is uh, people management. And I'm sure you've seen this. I've seen this. You have an employee, they're a very good employee. The company promotes them, right? They're very good at whatever they do, and the company promotes them, and now they're managing people, right? But just because you're a good developer or you're a good network engineer or you're a good systems administrator doesn't mean you're going to be a good people manager, right? You may be very good at what you do. It doesn't mean you're very good at managing people and tasks and priorities, things like that. So I think you should probably have this skill before you get to the role of CISO, but certainly a CISO needs to be able to manage people, right? Information security, cybersecurity, they can be very high pressure jobs depending on the role, right? And people will need time off. People will need you to do conflict resolution, right? All that stuff is, you have to look at your employees and you have to know when they need a break, and you have to tell them it's okay to do that, right? That's all people management, conflict resolution, all that other stuff. That's all people management. I don't think companies put enough, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think companies put enough of an importance on that skill, right? When they put somebody in a position of management, it's just they're very good at what they do, so make them a manager so we can pay them more money. Otherwise, they might leave to the competition or something like that, right? So, yeah, I think that's a very important skill for somebody to have.
Okay, and let's fast forward, like let's say in 5, 10 years, what do you think the skills that would be needed then from a CISO would be? Or in your opinion, is it going to look more the same, or is it going to be completely different?
So, I think what I'm seeing now, right, is, and I think this is the way the industry is going to go, is that there's not going to be a CISO for the company. I think it's going to become compartmentalized. You're going to get a CISO that's responsible for IT. You're going to get a CISO that's responsible for risk management. You're going to get a CISO that's responsible for privacy, right? And they're going to roll up to some C-level executive, right? They're not all going to roll up to the same C-level executive, depending on where they are, but they're all going to roll up to a C-level executive, or maybe even at the C-level, you have a chief security officer, right, who's responsible for all the CISOs, and they go in. But I think having one CISO for a company that's of a mid-sized company or any decent-sized company, it's just too much work for them to do, right? They're managing too many things: risk, uh, IT security, cybersecurity, physical security, right? All those, it's just too much for one thing to do. So one person to do. So I think what you're going to see is CISOs based on verticals within the company, and they'll all roll up to some, CSO, chief security officer position.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I actually, I mean, it's not the first time I'm hearing that, and that's definitely going to be interesting to look at and how this role continues to grow and mature. And in terms of innovation and the market and market trends, let's talk a bit about that before we wrap up today's episode.
Yeah, sure.
What, in your opinion, what will we see in the cybersecurity world next?
What are we going to see next? Well, I could tell you what I think we'll see, but I could tell you what I'd like to see. So, look, cybersecurity, like everything else, we're gonna see more and more AI in the future, right? With regards to the tooling that's available to us, right? As more companies um, switch to cloud-based security services, right? And all these cloud-based security providers gather intelligence from all their different clients, right? And they process it and blah, 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 right? All that other good stuff. I think you're going to see more and more of that, especially with more and more companies shifting to the cloud. Now, I know recently, with the economy taking a little bit of a downturn, there more and more companies are announcing that they're reducing their cloud spend, right? Uh, but that's going to be temporary. They're already there. They're certainly not going to back out of after spending all this money on the quote unquote digital transformation, right? And moving from on-prem to cloud. They're certainly not going to back out of the cloud, right? So well, they may reduce the cloud spend temporarily while the economy, you know, does a level set, right? When the economy starts growing again, they'll start spending in the cloud again, right? And that's going to bring more people jumping into these cloud-based security solutions, and more people attacking cloud-based SaaS applications, right? So I think that's where the industry is going. Something we touched on before, briefly in the beginning here, was the lack of available talent for the industry, right? What I would like to see is a shift from, I mean, if you've looked at some of the requirements for entry level cybersecurity people, they're not entry level at all, right? The companies are looking for college degrees, multiple certifications, right? Or sometimes both. They're looking for some experience. Give me somebody who's passionate about cybersecurity, somebody who's smart, who's interested in doing this, who's passionate about doing this, and I'll train them up, right? And if they're good at what they do, right, and they're a good employee, if after 2 3 years they don't want to do this anymore, let's find another role for them within the company, right? This is something I adopted at Equilen, right? When I was looking to fill IT positions, all right. Did I want you to know something about IT? Yes. I didn't want you to come off the street not knowing anything. I want you to know a little bit about IT. Yes. But I wanted somebody who was excited about working in IT and excited about working with our technology, right? And did all of them stay? No. But after a couple of years of doing it and they got to learn the business, they would come to me and say, you know what, I just don't want to do this anymore. And I would say, okay, let's see if we can find, are you interested in something else at Equilen, right? And they would move. So, probably 9 out of every 10 people that I hired at Equilen are still with the company, which is a good thing. A lot of companies are doing this rotational employee. I don't know if you're familiar with this, right? But they hire somebody and they spend a couple of months in, working in a finance department, and they might spend a couple of months in business development, right? They do that, and then they figure out what's best for them, and they put them there. Well, why aren't we doing that in technology? Right? Hire somebody, bring them in, let them work in IT, let them work in network engineering, let them work in cybersecurity, and see what they like, and see what they're passionate about, and see what they're good at, and fill the roles that way, and allow CISOs to increase their training budgets. Right? The quote unquote bad guys, right, are working all day long trying to develop new stuff and new tricks and everything, and you're sitting there with a kid who got a certification 3 years ago, right? And you put him in front of a terminal and say, make sure nothing bad happens, right? And you walk away, and maybe the kid gets 10 hours of online training, as part of his to-dos for the year, right? It doesn't make sense. We have to rethink how we're hiring people. We have to rethink how we're training people, and we have to make sure we allocate budgets for such.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. Definitely, and this is a very similar tactic to what we do. By the way, in-house training. You just have to. We're almost at coming up on time here. Let me just ask you a couple more questions before I let you go, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned the pandemic as a game changer. Anything, in general that you can say about like the changes in budget planning?
Yeah. So, look, when I was at Equilon, right, when COVID hit and everybody had to go remote, what we realized was not everybody was set up to work remotely, right? Some people just never did it. Right, technology guys, yes, they were, technology guys. They work all day, they go home, they have something to eat, they watch a little TV, and then they jump on and start checking emails and things like that. But business people, not so much, right? They'll take out their BlackBerry or whatever their mobile device was, and they'll answer some emails, and that's it. So they they weren't ready to work from home. We weren't ready to have them work from home. And I remember being on calls uh, with people from other financial companies that we did business with, and they would call me up and go, "How are you solving the remote work security problem with, you know, bring your own device? The people who are bring your own device, right? They have their own laptops or something like that." And I was like, "Well, we're still trying to figure out what are you guys doing?" And they were like, "We don't know. We were hoping you could tell us." Right? So everybody was kind of like, how do you do this, right? So look, bring your own device is great if you're willing to make that gamble, right? That you won't have to put some type of security in place on somebody's laptop or force them to do something with their own personal device. Um, Hence the big move to VDI, right? Now you don't have to worry about BYOD because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's connecting to VDI, but then you have to make sure that your bandwidth is there, right? If you need the entire company to go remote at all times, right? So uh, you know, there's your cloud spending in, right? So you know, companies have to do these things, these budgeting things with an eye on what's going to work in the future, not what's working right now, right? And unfortunately, I think too many of them and the pandemic certainly shook this up a bit, but I still think there's too many companies out there that think this was a one-time thing and they won't have to do it again, right? So they got through it and now they're fine, and everybody still gets a laptop every 3 years, right? And cross your fingers, or they'll let somebody buy a laptop or a iPad or something and expense it and keep their fingers crossed that they don't have a similar situation. It's not going to work long term, and I hate to be responsible for security in a company like that.
In your opinion, what's the best approach for a vendor to take to try and establish a connection with someone like you?
Uh Study my business, right? I'm gonna fall back on stuff I learned in some of my business classes, right? Do an analysis. Don't just I get far too many things on LinkedIn that say, "Hey, Michael, I see you're this. I see you have this role. We'd love to talk to you about our product, right?" And well, what makes you think I don't have that product? What makes you think I need that product, right? Just don't cold call me out of the blue trying to sell me something I might already have or that I don't necessarily need, right? And I know a vendor's not going to be able to tell what tools I have in place, right? Just by looking at at who I'm working for, right? But do some research on the company, right? Find out what we do, find out who our customers are, find out how long we've been around, read the news. Have we been the victim of some type of breach, right? Don't just cold call me out of the blue and say, "Hey, I was wondering if if you do X or if you need X," right? Do some type of research, right? And then I guess the other thing is, if you do happen to catch me and you have something interesting to say, um, show me that you want to be my partner, right? I've run into too many salespeople that have a product that we need and they sell it to me, and then I hear from them once a year when it's time to renew a service, when it's time to renew a contract for support or something like that. And in between that year, I don't hear from you, right? Look, I don't need you to be my best friend, right? But check in with me once in a while. Call me once a quarter and say, hey, how you doing? How's the product? Are you guys making full use of it? Do you know we have updates to it that can do A, B, and C for you? You know, and while you're talking to me and while you're doing that, talk to me about my business and what we're doing and the needs so that you can actually become a partner and help us get to that next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very good advice in my opinion. Other people in the industry that you look up to that you wanted to mention here?
In the industry that I look up to.
Yeah, well, I mean, in general, let's broaden the question. Other people that you look up to.
Well, it's a cop out. Look, I don't want to disrespect anybody else in the industry, but I'm going to say if an example of somebody look up to, it's really a cop out, but it was my dad. Right. My dad did not work in security. My dad didn't even work in technology. Right. He worked in collections for a utility company. But he designed a program. Right. He was in collections for a couple of years, and he said this was back in the 70s, early 70s, and he said our system of collections in this company has a lot of problems. And his boss challenged him and said, "Well, if you think you can come up with something better, go ahead." So he went about designing he basically flow charted it, right? He didn't know what flow charts were because, again, he wasn't a technology person. He basically flow charted a new collection system, and they put it in place in 1973, and it was still in place when he retired in 1997. Now, it had been tweaked over the years, right, as things changed. But I asked him about that, and I asked him, I said, what made it so good that they kept the same system in place for 24 years, right? And he said that when he approached the problem, he didn't concentrate on just how to create a better process, right? But he also tried to solve the problem of why so many accounts were ending up in collections, right? So, and all of a sudden the light went off in my head, and I was like, a more holistic approach to problem solving, right? Don't just provide an answer to the problem. Take a look at the bigger picture, right? We shouldn't have so many people in collections to begin with, and you're bogging down the system. So let's fix the problem of why so many people are going into collections, right? What's being done before they get here, right? That's bogging down this whole system, right? So that was really like, I said we didn't talk a lot about work because I didn't really understand what he did, and he certainly didn't understand what I did, right? He just didn't have that background. But when we talked about that, it was like a light went off, and I was like, so we're not just fixing something, we're actually solving problems, so that was like, okay, so like I said, he's not here anymore, right? So he passed a few years ago, but yeah, it was very enlightening when he told me that, and I said just the fact that he built something that was in use for so long, is a testament to the way he approached the problem, and I try to bring that same problem solving approach to things I face. So
yeah, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it might be a cop out to say my dad, but that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, no, sounds good to me. And then thank you for sharing that again. Final notes. What's the best way to connect with you online?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Right. Yeah. My LinkedIn profile.
Got it. And final bonus question: if money was never an issue, what would you do with your life?
So my wife and I just had this discussion, but based on the
based on the $2 billion
Powerball. Yeah. So I told her, I said, if I was the sole winner, so right, obviously the first thing everybody would do, you take care of your family, right? You help out some close friends, right? And then I told her after that, I would take some money, put it aside for us, right? To make sure we never had to worry about it. And then the rest of it, I would talk to some lawyers and some accountants about starting a foundation to just help people, right? What do you need, right? Do you need do people need help with their education? Do people need training for jobs? Do people need to get on, help people who need to get on their feet who are struggling? Things like that, right? Assist the people who need help, right? There's a lot of people out there that work two jobs and still have trouble getting things done, right? We have to figure out why that is and help solve that problem, right? So I would put the money towards something to that. And as much as I'd want to do it anonymously, right? Because I don't want to be viewed as a hero. I don't think I would, because I would probably call out other people who have far much more wealth than I would at my fingertips and say, why aren't you doing this? Right? Why aren't you contributing something? And I'm not talking about a one-time donation to a cancer charity. Like, look, all those things are great, and we certainly need them, right? Or a one-time donation to get your name on the wing of a hospital. Again, it's great, and we certainly need that. But if you're sitting there with billions of dollars, why are you just not taking? You don't need all that money. Bill Gates is a great example. I know there's people that have a problem with some of the stuff that Bill Gates has done in the past, but Bill Gates years ago said he's going to give away 95% of his money, and the guy's given away 60 or 70 billion dollars already, right?
Yeah.
For the other people that have that kind of money, why aren't you doing that? Right? Who needs $100 billion, $200 billion, right? Okay, you worked for it, you made some smart business moves, whatever, you got it. You don't need it all. Help people. And that's what I would do with that money. And like I said, I would really want to do it anonymously, right? But something about me says I would have to call out others.
Yeah, and that's that's a separate discussion. We can talk about it
Yeah.
much more, but with that, thank you for taking the time today, Michael. And I'm sure your answers would help a lot of our listeners out there. Any final notes on
I
your
hope
end?
so.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Any final notes?
You don't have to be paranoid to work in cybersecurity. It helps, right? But you certainly don't have to be. I think it's fun in a certain kind of way. I approach it as, another day where the good guys get to fight the bad guys, right? So I think we're the good guys. Maybe other people would disagree, but yeah, look, if you kind of view it in that light, it takes a lot of the pressure off. It can be a high pressure job, but please come into the industry. We need good people.
Thank you for that. Yeah, enjoy the rest of the week. See you later.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate your time. It's great talking to you.